We're not clapping. Poor old boy. But I can understand the desire to appreciate the lovely music. But it is difficult, isn't it, not to clap? It sort of naturally does that. Thank you, Biff. Really, really appreciate you setting that context. This is the first in a series that I'm going to be doing on the subject of creating space. And I find it interesting the way that we do courses here. They're normally about 6 to 8 weeks. And it's interesting how sort of the courses have begun to follow each other. Earlier in the year, I did a course on being at peace. And we did 4 or 5 weeks on that. And we ended on the point that the final point of peace is to be in harmony. And that led us to do a whole course of 8 weeks on harmony, which is what we did over the summer. And when we got to the end of that, we got to the idea that the way that you create harmony in our world is by creating space around ourselves for harmony to happen. And it's from this that we now have the Creating Space course. So here we are, and you can see gradually how these things come together. And I think there's an organic aspect to it. I do notice that with these courses, I actually don't know where they're going, and they sort of write themselves as we go along. And the conversations that we have during the service make a difference to that. You know, what you say in those conversations will often lead me as to where we go next. And so what we're actually doing here with these courses is we're together creating an understanding or an intelligence on a particular area. And so it's a dynamic. And also those of you watching online, you know, if you want to email in any ideas or text in any ideas, we really do appreciate it because, you know, it's the togetherness that makes it happen. And that's where we are. So here we are. And I always tend to like to look up the etymology of what I'm doing. So, of course, I began to look at the etymology of the word space. And it comes originally from the French word espace, which means, funnily enough, a period of time, a distance, an interval. And it also comes from the Latin word spatium, S-P-A-T-U-I-U-M, which means a room, an area, a distance, and a stretch of time. I was quite interested in the fact that both of these etymologies included the concept of time when they looked at the nature of space. And of course it does. If you look at the way we measure space out there, how do we measure space? We measure space in light years, which is the time it takes light to travel in a year. So our measurement in space includes time. And so we already do think about space in terms of time. And I think when, you know, we think about giving people space, and I think that's an important aspect. When you think about giving someone space, there's obviously as well in that a time element involved. We want them to have the time to arrive at wherever they need to be through us giving them space. The idea of distance is also time orientated. So we're talking about space here, and I'm just so struck by the fact that we do include the concept of time in space. It's not just a measurement of how far something comes in terms of miles, but also how long it takes to get there. 1 mile is no distance for a car, but it's a hell of a long way for a snail. And you can see how those distances are. So we have space being time, we have space being distance, and also we have space being volume. Volume is the amount of space that a substance or object occupies, or that is enclosed within a container, especially when it's great. So the volume. So the thing I get from all of this is that space is multidimensional. And we're at the beginning of looking at the concept of space, about giving space and creating space. And the first thing is that space is multidimensional. You have the 3 dimensions, height, length, and width. And then you have the 4th dimension, which is time. And I think also with space, you have a 5th dimension. In physics, the 5th dimension, I always like the way, when we talk about spirituality, it is incredible the way that physics and spirituality come together. And so often I found over the last couple of years, in talking about spirituality, I end up in the realm of physics. In fact, last year, this bloke came up to me and said, I'd just like you to know that I'm an astrophysicist. I thought, oh no, there I was, pontificating. He said, no, you're on the right track. It's fine, don't worry about it. And then he came back this year, and so you met him, didn't you, Bruce, the astrophysicist? Anyway, so you have to be worried when you've got people in the... Are there any physicists in the audience today? That's good. In physics, he said authoritatively, in physics, the 5th dimension is a micro dimension of space, too small to see. That's what the 5th dimension is. And it has a mathematical value in theoretical models of the universe. So the 5th dimension in physics, it has a mathematical volume in theoretical models of the universe, like string theory. Experiments like the Large Hadron Collider may find direct evidence of the 5th dimension if scientists can prove graviton particles are real and are disappearing into it. So you've got that 5th dimension. In other words, the 5th dimension is, if you take it as being the smallest particle, you can see it as being what many of us experience as an aspect of unity of consciousness, that which the universe is all made up of. And as a particle, as an aspect of it, it represents that unified nature. It is the inner space that contains the outer space that we're aware of. It is the consciousness that contains. That smallest bit is the Tao that cannot be seen. It's the God bit. And they even call it, you probably heard it on the news, they will refer to it as the God particle, the self. Interestingly enough, in information theory, information is considered the 5th dimension, in that it shapes our thoughts. Information shapes our thoughts, it shapes our behavior, and reality, like the other dimensions of space and time. It is something that the information, it shapes all of that. And really, if you take it down, consciousness, and we sort of tend to live in the area of consciousness here. Consciousness is just information that shapes the creation of everything. You can actually define consciousness as a function of information that then creates everything. So when we're thinking about space, we're talking about something that shapes that which it contains. Space shapes that which it contains. And I think it fits well with both a spiritual and a science understanding. So essentially the concept of space is one that includes not only shape and volume and time, but also a generative, creative quality. In that it goes further than the normal concept of it just being a void. It is something that is generative. Space, the creation of space, is generative. It is more of the qualities of the essential nature that we encounter in spirituality, in that it shapes things. From the Tao Te Ching, look and it can't be seen. Listen and it can't be heard. Reach and it can't be grasped. Above it isn't bright, below it isn't dark. Seamless, unnameable, it returns to the realm of nothing. Form that includes all forms. Image without an image, subtle beyond all conception. Approach it and there is no beginning. Follow it and there is no end. You can't know it, but you can be it. At ease in your life, just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. And that's the biggest concept of space, the generativeness that creates anything that's within it. The no beginning and the no end bits hint at the multidimensional nature. And isn't it interesting that was written, years and years ago, and yet it contains the essence of our understanding of science as it is at the moment. And it almost, this concept of space is something generative, that it is the potential. It's included in the concept of the word that you find in John's Gospel, the Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Again, in that concept of the Logos, there is the idea of potentiality. And really, space is potential. It is the nothing that contains the possibility of something not yet there. Space is the nothing that contains the potentiality of something not yet there. And I think this gives the whole idea of space something more interesting. And when we're talking about creating space, and I think it's important to get these sort of theories in your mind, because what we really have to be here is practical. We always have this idea that what we're here to do is to work out how to live life more skillfully. And so what we're doing here, in a sense, we're creating the understanding around the subject of space, multidimensional, the creation of potential, in order for us to be able to ourselves create space, because that's what we're really looking at doing, the idea of creating space. So what we're doing when we're talking about creating space is creating something that has a potential for form. When we're creating space, we're creating something that has a potential for form, that exists as a function of time and holds the potential for something to come about. That's really what creating space is. We always say that nature abhors a vacuum. And that alludes to the creativity in nature and its relationship to space. So we have space as being multidimensional, a source of potentiality that includes the inside of things as well as the outside of things. And you can see it in the inside of things. I did mention this before I went away, this idea that science tells us that we're 99.99% space within ourselves. And I think, to some extent, you think, well, yeah, but I feel solid. So what does that matter? But the reality of the situation is that the huge space within atoms, science tells us that the nucleus of an atom, if it was as large as a grain of sand, then the atom itself would be as big as this chapel in the parking lot. You can see the relationship between the two. And you can see the enormity of space on the outside as well by just looking up. If you want to look at what it's like inside, you just look up into space and see the enormity of it. And in a sense, when we look up in space, we're really almost looking at a microscope of ourselves. It's really what you would see if you looked in a microscope at atoms and things like that. And when you look at atoms like that, it does look a bit like space. So space, first of all, is all around us, and space is within us. And all of it has the potential for creation. And we're talking about the potential for creation. So the question is, how does it work? And, if you look at the beginning of the book of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So that beginning of Genesis has the concept of formlessness and emptiness that is space. And it adds the corollary that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So you got that traditional idea, the sense of divine creation. And also if you go back to the Big Bang, we also have that moment of creation that throws everything into space from seeming nothing. You know, in science and the Big Bang, you've got that same aspect of things coming from nothing. So you have the idea in both areas of a fundamental orderedness that brings forth form into the void. You've got the essence of the beginning as being form coming into the void. And if you're thinking, you know, right now, well, I don't understand any of this. I don't understand. I don't understand how it works. Then you'd be right. Because really it is something beyond our understanding. It is something really hidden in the cloud of unknowing. And all we can do is to get hints of how it works and what the sort of measurements are, how we might frame things, the potentiality, the space. You get hints from looking at it from different directions. And all we're doing is getting hints that we can then think, well, if it does work like this, perhaps it could work like that. But how it works, God only knows, literally. We don't know. You know, it says in Job, these things are too wonderful for you to understand. And it's a great relief just to have that. You don't have to work it all out. It's hidden by the cloud of unknowing. It's not ours to understand the process of creation. It's up to us to witness it and be a part of it. That's what our job is to witness it and to be a part of it. And just as both in the Bible and the Big Bang, divine creativity brought forth form from the void, or it came out of the Big Bang, those two science and spirituality ways of looking at it. So in our own lives, there's a process of bringing forth form from the void. Bringing forth form. From our first cry as a baby, we are filling the space with waves. In that case, sound waves that were not there beforehand. The baby fills the space with waves. And we go through our lives filling the space around us with ideas and actions and thoughts and emotions. Everything seems to bubble up from the depths of our being. Almost like the Spirit of God hovering over the waters and bringing forth form into being where there was none. You know, we're familiar with that. We're familiar. You know, just turn on the television and it pours out like a geyser. We know that it comes out from nothing. We are creative beings who see our role in life being as to, you know, what our role in life is to make a mark. And we do that by creating something where once there was nothing. We want to create that mark. And we pour form in. But, you know, the big question is, how do you create space? And I think that's different. It's different from pouring forth the stuff that we pour forth in order to make our mark in life, which for most of us is what we want to do. We want to make a mark. We want to say, you know, I'm here for, 70 years and 10 or whatever it is, and boom, I'm going to make my mark. It's easy to see how to create something. It's less easy to see how to create nothing or how to create space. And in truth, it's not something that we can create. I know this series is about creating space, but actually it's not something that we can create. It is something that we have to get out of the way and allow it to happen. Trouble is that most of us don't want to get out of the way. We're much more keen in giving everyone the benefit of our infinite wisdom and how to do stuff, of telling people what to do and how to do it. This creating space is not that. It is an act of service. That famous verse from Philippians 2. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality of God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He made himself nothing. We're talking about an act of service where we get out of the way and allow space to come through us. But, it doesn't quite work because we feel so solid and the world feels so solid. So how can any of that space come into being? But if we think of space with all those dimensions that we spoke of before, of height and width and breadth and volume, and the fifth dimensions of both inner space, of unity of consciousness that connects all things, and the information that contains the potential for form, consciousness being the information that contains the potential for form, then we have a route to allowing the emptiness of space to come through. We realize that we're part of the infinite universe and therefore connected to both form and space. And by withdrawing the form aspects of ourselves from the equation, we then allow space to come through us, which is what we do in meditation. We withdraw the form aspects, the thoughts being the form aspects. And in withdrawing the form aspects, we allow something different to come through our hearts. Like the Spirit of God coming through us when we get out of the way and serve. A famous quote from Merton that I always use, but actually it does give this idea of space. God utters me like a word containing a partial thought of himself. A word will never be able to comprehend the voice that utters it. But if I'm true to the concept that God utters in me, if I'm true to the thought of him that I was meant to embody, I shall be full of his actuality and find him everywhere in myself and find myself nowhere. I shall be lost in him. I shall find myself. I shall be saved. If we allow ourselves to be uttered in this way, we find ourselves in the no place that allows the divine creative space to come through us. On our own, we're always trying to make something of anything that comes our way. But with this surrender, we open up a portal that allows a latent creativity, the essence of life, that takes up no form and is only the space for something to happen. We allow that to come through us. This is the alchemy that allows us to turn the dross and humdrum aspects of our lives into the gold of divine creativity. This is the alchemy that allows us to turn the dross and humdrum aspects of our lives into the gold of divine creativity. We add nothing, but we allow something to be taken away, and through doing this, we become vehicles for that divine. This is the essence of what it means to create space. However, we also have to use our faculties, our understanding, to work out what to do in cooperation with this latency. And it is through this that we engage in the process of bringing it into the world. And I'm going to talk more about that next week. Thank you. Space. Any thoughts from what I've been saying about space? Yes, there we are, Bruce.
Perhaps jumping ahead in your series, where you sort of address the concept of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. In other words, you don't rush to tell them what to do and how to do it. You let them fool around until they finally say, hey, can you help me with this? And the other one is the famous quote about between the trigger and the response, there's a space.
Yeah.
But you got to work on creating that capability of pausing. And then if you're just mindful, stuff emerges. And then you have to think about your thinking in a sense. But so I think that, in our interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships, we can create space.
Do you know, it's so interesting, 'cause I think, when we talk about things, we know all these things, don't we? I mean, that idea of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. We all go, oh yeah, obviously. But if you look at the dynamics of what is happening in that, it's when the student is able to create the space for the teacher to appear, then the teacher will appear. And similarly with the, between, stimulus and response, there is a space. We know that by creating that space, something new can come in. And we know that by holding that space and enabling that space, then something changes in our lives. And yet, I know that I spend most of my time trying to fill the space with stuff. Heather and I are now empty nesters. In fact, Sam, my daughter said, gave me a book when he left, which was Cooking for Two. And inside she wrote, good luck, empty nesters. But again, we now have an opportunity. There is a new space that is there. And if you're looking for space in your life, if you actually can recognize it, and the temptation is to, fill it with, dope and spirits parties and everything that you can do. Now you've got an empty house, no kids to look after, But no, suddenly there's a new space. And actually, Heather and I are finding a sense of potential in that space. And it happens everywhere, I think, in our work. When you finish a project or something happens, the temptation is to try and fill it with more stuff, isn't it? But actually, if you can revere the space and hold it, something else happens. Thank you, Bruce. That's really good. I really appreciate that. Okay, anybody else? Yes, Ward.
It just appears to me or occurs to me that we don't create space. Space is there. It was there in the beginning. It was a formless void. What we do is create a container that a vehicle where we can enjoy that space.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a fine line there because it does take, Richard Rohr always talks about the first half of life and the second half of life. And he says the first half of life is all about creating the container. And then the second part of life is just letting go of the container that you have created to allow the space to be there. But the truth of the matter is that you've first of all got to create I do think that there's a mindfulness about creating that container. And we do have a role to play in the process of that creation. And really what we're doing in the spirit, in our work here together, is desperately trying to work out how to create the container. And we look out into the world and we look at the Middle East and we think, and all of us want somehow to make a difference in that way. And the trick is to work out how to get oneself out of the way, as you were saying, to have that space come through us as well. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But I do think, and this is what I'm going to be saying over the next few weeks, I do think there are ways that we have to act in order to have that space come back. That's when that's what our prayers are for. That's what our spiritual inner work, that's why we're here. We're here to be alchemists. Our work is alchemy. And it's so interesting, isn't it, in the 15th century? I mean, in Florence and in Assisi, it's all about the 15th century, I walked around that corner, and there was David. That, for me, was the biggest moment. The space in that room, that huge thing was there, and the whole place was contained by that. And also in Assisi, Francis's birth, I never knew I was going to see Francis. It just dominated. It created a space where there was reverence. No one talked in the cathedral. Occasionally people did, and they'd be shh, like that. There were space creators there who did that. But that was amazing. And then also, in the Uffizi Gallery, walking around the corner and suddenly seeing the birth of Venus, which I'd seen so many times. It just hit, it's suddenly these artists, they move us, they create the space in us for something. And I think art, and that's what struck me. Heather and I came to the conclusion that we were walking around a work of art. The whole of Florence is, in fact, you don't have to look for the art. It's just there, you are part of it. And it just formed us in a way. And I think art is an aspect. And I'm so pleased, isn't it amazing we've got the gallery downstairs? There is a place that's designed to move us, to create the space for us to be different from looking at art, I think. So, I think there's work to do. Do you want to come back to me? Yes, I'll come to you next. Thank you,
I always come from the space of being quiet and then just allowing one movement to move into the next and spending a lot of time just allowing that movement to flow through me.
We have a dancer here, as you probably know, and I would love to see somehow how we could have that silence that's at the center of us. And, that brings us straight to, anybody? Elliot. In the still place, there is the dance. That Elliot says that.
And it feels so good.
Yeah.
When you just allow that to come from that space through your body.
Yeah. Elliot says that, the still place in the turning world, which you always come back to. It's absolutely going through everything. And it's so exciting to actually recognize the truth. We know it. All this stuff, we all actually know. And all this is, when I look at this, I'm just reminding myself of what I know. And it's so familiar. And we think, yeah, of course. Anybody else? Yes, Brennan.
So I'm just curious about, so there's the creating space, as Bruce had mentioned, you're giving yourself space to witness whatever comes up and maybe not react to it, right? But then I also wonder, to use sort of like the physics metaphor, if action is the object in the world that bumps up against other action that causes sort of a chain of events.
Yeah.
Also, like the Bhagavad Gita, you have the right to your actions, but you don't have the right to the sort of fruits of your action, that sort of idea. One thing that I think I struggle with is always coming back to that, how do you know when you need to take that action in the world and that it's not coming from a place of ego versus coming from a place of transcendent or the divine or something along that. Because I think I heard someone say once, or it was Adyashanti, if you're familiar with him at all, had said, the ego is pretty tricky. He's trying to get in your house, you shut the front door. He's trying to get in your window, you shut the window. It comes down the chimney, you light a fire. It goes through the basement. It's just always very persistent in trying to sort of subvert that, I think, that connection for myself. That's my experience. So I'm wondering if you have some commentary about that.
I like when we get the easy questions here. Brennan always comes up with the easy question. How do you know? My easy answer is yes, read the Bhagavad Gita. That is the whole of the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, I think the first thing I'd want to say is that the very fact that we're in the world means we have to act. Our birth gives us we have the requirement to respond to being born. And I have that in my meditation. The thing that strikes me every single day is the responsibility that I have in being alive.
I like the etymology of that word, responsibility.
Yeah. That's, so I have a huge responsibility. I'm going to be dead. I'm going to be dead. And when I'm dead, I'm not going to have any ability to affect anything. I mean, it's true, you don't have any ability to affect anything. But when I'm alive, I've got this a huge world, and how do I respond, to that? And I think the awareness of one's requirement to be in the world, and also I think the realization of the uniqueness of our lives, in that if you look from the outside and think there is me and there is that situation, and these are people doing stuff over there, your mind tries to make up how you should act. But if you're just responding to your life and doing what James Finley said, which is, given all the circumstances, what is the most compassionate thing that I can do at this particular moment? That there is an aspect of that. And in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, you have to go and kill these people. And that is a paradox. It's a huge paradox. And I think that's a paradox we can unpack over the next few weeks. But if we have nothing else from this morning, we have that question. That is the question. That is to be or not to be. That is the question. I mean, that is the essential question of life. And you have just asked it. And that's what we will take away and remember from today. So thank you for arriving